Payments.com came out with a consumer survey showing that 62% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. The numbers are even pretty depressing for high income households. For those over 100,000, it's 48%. And for those over 200,000, it is still over 1/3, nearly 36%. In this video, I just want to show you some of this survey data and then maybe give you a couple ideas on how you can avoid being one of those households. My name is Scott Caulfield. I'm a CPA and a CFA charter holder and the founder of Sophos Wealth Management. First, a quick note on the survey. So this came from payments.com. They surveyed nearly 4,400 US households and also I think supplemented with some data from the Fed. And this was done in January of 2024. Now, what this survey showed is that we've got pretty high, consistent paycheck to paycheck living of US households. Over the last 4 years, the percentage of US households living paycheck to paycheck has been fairly steady. I mean, much of these are in that 60 to 64% range. You could argue there's been a slight uptick from maybe the trial in 2021, but by and large, this survey looks pretty consistent, which is kind of interesting. I mean, we've had pretty big wage growth and you would maybe expect things to be a bit better coming out of COVID, but at the same point in time, we've had so much inflation that I think that's taken a real toll on households. And a lot of those excess consumer savings have been eaten up. And I think this is something that you're kind of hearing economically is that people at the low end and maybe even middle end are struggling more than is reported on some of the top line data. But nevertheless, this survey at least shows nearly 2/3 of US households are living paycheck to paycheck. Now, one of the interesting things that they broke down in this survey as well is based on income levels. How many are people living paycheck to paycheck? Not surprisingly, those earning less than 50,000 are the highest proportion living paycheck to paycheck. So around 76%. And that's actually just, again, stayed fairly steady. As you get in the 50 to 100,000 range, you're talking about nearly 2/3, 66%. And then that 100,000 range, it's around 48%. And not shown on this chart, but included in the survey was that 200,000 up demographic, and that was 36%. So even a pretty high number of high income households are living paycheck to paycheck. And then not surprisingly, if you go by generation, you're going to find a greater number of Gen Z and millennials being younger are living paycheck to paycheck, a little bit less for baby boomers and Gen X. Not surprising. I mean, if anything, I thought it would actually be more pronounced. Millennials starting households. I would expect to see a higher paycheck to paycheck as you're having young kids purchasing your first half. Retirees, baby boomers, seniors, I would expect actually fewer to be living paycheck to paycheck. But there's the data, just kind of interesting. Now let's take a quick look at the reasons people gave for why they're living paycheck to paycheck. And this was once again broken down by income demographics. So insufficient income, not surprisingly, for those earning less than 50K is by far and away the number one factor for why they're living paycheck to paycheck. As income increase, that becomes a lessening factor, although for whatever reason, it does dip up for those earning more than 200K. And I'll kind of caveat, that's one of the things with surveys sometimes. I mean, maybe that's true in reality, but this is 4,400 households. How many households did they talk to that were over 200,000? So it may or may not be a perfect survey, but I think it gives us directionally correct information. And you can see, so debt, pretty significant issue across the spectrum. Interestingly, or not that surprising, that for those earning more than 200K, it's not as big a factor. I would have expected maybe for those less than 50K, it to be a bigger factor just with credit cards. But then again, a lot of those people in the 50 to 100 or even 100 to 200K range have things like bigger mortgages, larger car payments. So debt becomes a pretty big factor there. And then the pain for family members, it actually doesn't really surprise me that much that that's a big factor for those earning over 200K and more high income households. Not surprising to see. I mean, one, you've got huge college payments, and it tends to be higher income households that pay a lot for their kids' college. Two, you just see that is a big factor, is childhood welfare. From high to very high income households. And for some, that's just a great gift they're able to give, but many probably can't truly afford what they're giving. And that actually is a significant barrier to retirement for some. One of the other ones you see here is just recently used a significant amount of savings, and that's a real problem for those high income households. And I'm not really sure how they did the survey, because you kind of wonder, I mean, were those splurges? In which case, are you really living paycheck to paycheck? Or was that more for an emergency? I mean, if you had to shell out 30 grand for a new roof, or suddenly had a medical emergency, you could eat into those savings quickly. Now, how can you avoid being one of these statistics? I mean, obviously nobody wants to live paycheck to paycheck. And I just have a couple quick ideas for you. First, and it's just an easy go-to recommendation for everybody, is make your savings automatic. If you try to spend as little as possible and save whatever's left over at the end of the month, you're gonna find not much money there at the end of a lot of months. So I'm a huge proponent of always doing automatic savings, right? Come make that 401k right out of your paycheck. If you're saving for another bucket, let's say you're saving for a trip at the end of the year, have an automatic deduction the first thing it hits that bank account, or even before it does. The other thing to really keep an eye out for is just avoiding lifestyle inflation. You know, so many people, as you make more, you just slowly creep up. It just tends to not be an intentional thing. So just try to make your savings very intentional. What's your goal? How much of a saving rate do you need to get there? Can you make that automatic? And then, you know, basically, if you force yourself to save that, then you can only spend what's in the account before it comes out. Again, it's just so hard to do later. And then with the lifestyle inflation thing, it's just trying to be more conscientious of what you're doing. So don't just automatically buy that new car, buy that new outfit, do this, that, the other, because you'll quickly find the whole keeping up with the Joneses mindset. You will be living paycheck to paycheck. And I know I don't necessarily have hard data on this aspect, but I've seen in my experience working with a lot of clients, it's really a mentality thing. There are super high income people who have just a great savings mentality, just like there are people who've not earned a very great income and have a great saving mentality. You know, inversely, I've seen super high income people who've barely got two nickels to rub together because they're just spenders. They just don't have whatever that habit is, that sort of innate saving. I don't know if it's nature or nurture, but they just don't tend that way. And, you know, same thing, you see people without a lot of income who probably arguably harder to save anyways, but just don't have that kind of basic makeup. And I think a lot of times it's just a mentality I see, you know, people who just don't really pay attention versus people who just have an attitude of savings, and, you know, they're turning lights off in their house and they're using both sides of the paper. And as trivial as those things might be in a dollars and cents aspect, I think it's the mindset that makes a big difference to people. So just some ideas for you, you know, starting early, establishing good habits, making things automatic. That's what's going to really set you up for success. People don't typically just stumble into a good savings rate. And, you know, personal finance is hard. Just because the concepts of personal finance are simple does not mean it's easy to implement. You know, human behavior works against us. We want instant gratification. Spending and credit cards is so easy. So, you know, always encourage you to visit my website for more information, like this video, and subscribe to my channel. Thanks a lot.